In a crisis, people are looking for leaders that they can trust. Leaders that they can trust are fair. Leaders that they can trust will be concerned about my situation. Can I trust them to have my type of situation under, or will I be disadvantaged by their decision making because they don't care about my part of the population? And so it's really important in a crisis that you feel that the leader understands your particular situation or your group's situation. At the same time, you want a leader who's competent, who can make decisions and will consider the science and make good decisions in hindsight that we can say, wow, that was actually really good during a time of a lot of uncertainty. And we see that in the countries like Germany, New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, the countries that do have these women as heads of state. They took action very quickly. So they were women who were ahead of the curve in terms of when the cases were coming. And that was very critical in managing this particular illness, was the swift action before even the first case came along. And so they were able to take, but these same women have also had messages of compassion in the Nordic countries, and I'm going to forget which one it was, Iceland or Finland. I think it was Finland, who the prime minister had a special televised segment for children and trying to engage them as well. And so really recognizing what their fears may be.
I'm just going to pipe up here, Grant, if I may. I was listening to Marlene's interview on the CBC last week. And Marlene, you captured two phrases, like it was taking care and taking charge. Yes. And I really felt that summarized the essence of what you're talking about.
Yes, precisely.
Lorena, you talk, speaking of phrases, I think of a couple of words, and I associate them with people like you: resilience and adaptability. In these times, talk to us a little bit about resilience and what that means to you and why it's needed now.
Well, for me, and I'm not an academic, I'm a very determined prairie gal. But I think when one speaks of that origin, I grew up in a small community in southern Manitoba, an agricultural community. My father was a livestock dealer. My mother was a nurse, and she went on to be a public health nurse. But it was a community of about 3,500 people, and there was something about the scale of that community that, as well as the ethos of being self-reliant. And through that self-reliance, you forged as a community a certain degree of resilience. I also think about a very fascinating piece I read in the Globe and Mail about resilience about a year or so ago. And they were saying that resilience is more than just digging into yourself, but the capacity for resilience will come through the strength of the community and network you have around you. I also think in this road of how to create resilience of the anthropologist from the UK called Robin Dunbar. And he studied primates and was curious as to if there was some physiological component that informed the group size of the primates. And he found that there was a direct relationship between the neocortex of primates and their group size. And that for the human species, that number, that optimal number, that sweet spot is about 150 to 200. And what that means is people within the community know each other, they're invested in each other, they're accountable to each other, and so on. And so when I think about resilience and how history or even anthropology or some other disciplines inform that, my own feeling is that not unlike the Finnish education system that was razed to the ground around 1990, and the Finns studied a lot of the highest standards and best practices around the world and then built their education from scratch. My instinct is that we need to go back to the basics of what informs a strong network and community based on what we as a species are built for.
Do either of you, I'll ask both of you this, I'm really curious about whether or not you think that women are better at adapting and pressing on better than men. Mark?
So I liked, first of all, that you paired resilience with adaptation. When I think about resilience, it's being able to, in the face of challenge, be able to hold on to the core of who you are, whether that is as an individual or whether that is as a group or a community, as Lorena mentioned. It's that you understand what the core is, the core beliefs, the core values that you have, and that doesn't change. But the adaptability is being able to take that core and adapt to the new circumstance, a different way of being while still holding on to the core. So I think it's really beautiful to pair these two comments, these two words together, these two concepts together, and how in the past humans have been able to adapt to new environmental threats, maybe not so well always, but there is a lot of resilience if you take a look at our history and being able to survive and to evolve. So are women more adaptable, I think was the question, getting back to that?
Yes.
I think one of the things is that we know that women, when we have more women sitting at the table making decisions for a group of people, making whether that be for an organization or whether that is for a community, women bring forward concerns for those at the margins. They bring forward the concerns of the more vulnerable and marginalized of the community. They bring forward the issues that challenge the fabric of a community in a different way than what is expected and what the stereotype is of men, and that often men, we know that from the research, that the women do bring different issues to the table. And so are women more adaptable? I think it's in the core and expected gender expectations that women are more concerned about the social aspects. And that's, part of what we're struggling with right now is how do we reconvene to be the people that we are? How do we, with the social distancing, how do we physically distance but not socially distance? And that is core to the stereotypes of women and our expectations of women that we learn from young up.
I want to thank you, Marlene, and I want to give you both just in a few minutes' time a bit of a case study. We're going to put some meat on the bones here. Lorena, I think about over the years that I've known you, I've been presence when you have rubbed shoulders with political leaders and they with you. And Marlene talked about the leadership that we're seeing at the, in the public health realm among physicians and nurses and scientists. What about politicians? When you are in their company, and I'm thinking about women who are politicians, what do you notice about them? These leading senior politicians. I mean, I, of course, think about people these days like Chrystia Freeland and Patty Haydu and Christine Elliott. What do you notice about politicians in times of crises?
Well, I have to begin by saying I can't say I've spent an abundant amount of time with politicians, particularly even female politicians. It is true that I've, in various occasions had, a social kind of event. I mean, I think that this is part of one of the other challenging things is to understand the framework in which our current contemporary society is operating, and everyone is sort of trapped in it. And there's a particular, I won't say game, but there's a particular formula or format. And it's really difficult for anyone to break out of that. And yet I do feel that that is what's needed. I just want to go back to some of what Marlene was saying, and your question that you were asking her. I've often wondered, and I'd be interested in what your thoughts are on this, Marlene, but women traditionally, I mean, we know that they're the part of the equation that bear children, and if there's there's an extended family, it follows, it seems to my logic, that women would grow up with their radar and their vision being quite broad in terms of looking after the flock. And moreover, they would be particularly acute to any threats. So that vision is looking, vertically as well as horizontally in terms of the community, but also looking at life and the community in terms of risk management. And I've often wondered, is there something to that kind of line of thinking?
There certainly is. I think the aspect of risk management, it's always been positioned, early research anyway, positioned that women, was an argument against why women wouldn't make very good organizational leaders because they were risk averse. And being able to run a business, you need to be able to take risks. What we know now of more recent research is that perhaps the overconfidence of some particularly white males might be not prudent. And so the consideration of all of these social factors, and also women understanding that they'll often get blamed first if something goes wrong, they tend to seek more input, and they tend to seek to listen to a lot of other, and then formulate it and figure out, is this something that everybody will get behind as well. And so it's the consideration of what is the best way forward for a group when you're a leader, that I think women, because of the challenges that they have for their leadership, that they've learned to seek input, to seek cover, so to speak, to gather others around themselves that will be going in the same direction. That may not be the case. That those challenges, like I've mentioned before, women do face particular challenges when they are in senior leadership roles or any leadership roles. And so looking after the flock, I love that term that you just used, Lorena, is it places more responsibility when you think of the individuals as people. They're family members, they're somebody's family members, and you're trying to look after that flock. And so you do take risk, and there are more risks. So that's the reality. Women and ethnic minorities, actually, there is more risk in the world for them. And so from young up, we've been trained to identify those risks when we're just living in our day-to-day, everyday lives, is to be alert and to be vigilant. And that gets carried over, I think, into a leadership role as well.
You two, we're getting short on time, but may I share a couple of things with you and get your feedback on it? A couple of things I've been thinking about a lot. About what separates leaders, leaders who are women, leaders who are men. And Marlene, I'm really curious, has there been any research shown in leaders who actually don't identify with either gender? Is that something that's emerging in the halls of academia?
Very, very little. The research that I have found is more around women who are lesbian, and very little even with gay males, even less so. And certainly non-binary individuals, I have not seen that in particular. No. It is interesting. You mentioned about lesbian. It's interesting because the same gender expectations are not put on women who are homosexual.
I'll keep my eye out for emerging study on that. Here's another thought that I've had. Lorena, I I've often been wondering, and this is not a new area of curiosity with me, it's been going on for decades. You know, I think back to the days that I was involved with student politics and how we talk. I mean, you'd hear all of the familiar terminology and the catchphrases like collective would be one of them. Consensus would be another. I wonder, in the midst of this pandemic, does leadership really matter? I mean, don't these times call for a paradigm shift, of, as they say in university? I mean, away from that chain of command, the pecking order, the hierarchy. Do we need leadership anymore?
Well, I mean, I was listening to a program a few weeks ago that was touching on leadership, and they were suggesting that what you don't want is a leadership that is all about the brand, all about the ego, but you're looking for leadership that has the qualities of a broad vision, that is consensus building. And I think, just going back to what we were talking about risk a few moments ago, is it's not risk averse, but we're talking about a concept of smart risk. And what I found so impressive of some of the women that Marlene was mentioning at the very onset, they were able to triage the risk and the threat, and they were able to move very swiftly. And that takes a very keen eye and keen ability to synthesize a lot of strands of information rather quickly and take a position and live with it. And not more than live with it, hopefully it turns out for the best of all. So I think, for me, if there is a kind of strong version of leadership, it is those who do their research and their homework in advance, that have prepared contingency plans for problems, that work with consensus building, that have their radar, that are looking for the common good in the long run, and then are equipped for when an emergency hits. They can synthesize that information very quickly and come to a very strong position.
What are your
couple
thoughts?
of things
Go ahead.
I was just going to say a little bit, the difference between leader and leadership. When we focus only on the leader, we miss out on leadership, where that is a process between a number of people. And it's a process between someone who's in a formal leadership role, but they also are collecting, and it's more of a collective direction that we're going. And these women that are at the top, these networks and the advisory relationships, they're not new. They've already been relying on those relationships. They're pre-existing this crisis leadership. If you take a look at all of these women that we mentioned before, they've already been providing leadership. They already have their networks and have ways of reaching out to the public and to make sure that they are addressing concerns. So yes, I do think we need to still have someone that facilitates, even if it is collective leadership. There are still roles that people play. It's how they play in a process of leadership, rather than just focusing on the leader, the hero leader that's going to save us all.
Here's your case study.
I just would add in there, if I may, Grant, there's a wonderful phrase I heard within the RCF, is that you can't always be the boss, but you can always lead. And that's something I really aspire to.
Right. That's great. Are you ready for your quick case study?
Sure.
So here, Marlene, I don't know if you've had the opportunity, I hope you have, to visit our little city here to see theater and much else in Stratford.
Yes, of course.
That's terrific. And you may know that we have a very popular mayor here, and he's a 5-term mayor. He's possessed of many solid and very visible practical skills and know-how. He's considered to be a strong leader. He's getting lots of plaudits these days. Now, on the other side of things, some people would say that he keeps a tight grip on what I like to call the talking stick. Now, what I find interesting is this is a mayor who is in regular daily contact, practically, with the medical officer of health, the CAO of the city. the head of the world famous theater festival here, the CEO of the local investment office for Stratford, and each of those people is a woman, as are dozens of community and business leaders in Stratford. So I'm wondering, what is the key for a guy like this when it comes to working with leaders like those women? What does he need to be mindful of?
Should I take a stab at it, Lorena?
Sure, please. Yes, either one of you.
So it's fabulous that he is surrounding himself with very strong women who have a voice. And I think the advice is to really understand that their point of view and their perspective is legitimate, even when it's different than his own. I cannot begin to understand what the life of a woman of color is in a leadership role. I have some friends that are women of color who are in leader roles. Their experiences are in some ways similar than mine, but they're different. And we can't begin to really understand the experiences and the impact of decisions. The impact of decisions, political decisions, vary by gender. The impact varies by race, religion, age, all of those things. And so it's really important that he understands that these perspectives are legitimate, even when they may differ amongst each other and differ from his own. But fabulous that there are these number of women sitting at the table.
I should add, the two of you, that 4 of our city councilors in Stratford are women. I'm a newcomer here, relatively so. For the past, I guess, 5 or 6 years, we've been here. And sometimes when I look around and bend my ear, I have a hard time hearing voices of women in leadership positions, whether at the city council level or elsewhere, and I'm listening for them. Lorena, am I listening hard enough? Am I not going to the places to find them? I don't want to get too airy-fairy here. I mean, I could attend city council meetings, I guess. I don't. But are we hearing enough of those women of influence in our community?
It's hard for me to say, because I've deliberately chosen a very narrow strand of communications. I'm mostly not on social media, etc. So in some ways, I'm not sure that how much I can comment on that. I mean, I think I'm very happy, as Marlene said, that our mayor has many strong women around that he's connecting with, and also that there is this representation on city council. The difficulty I think I have as a citizen, even with my narrow communication routes, is that we've lost a lot of infrastructure in terms of monitoring or engaging in what is going on with our traditional media. For example, I used to go to city council meetings. There used to be a lot of media there, and I think for me, one of the most serious ingredients of our contemporary society is that we've lost a sense of agora, and we've lost agora where we're all paying attention to the same subject, and we can do it relatively easily, quickly, and confidently. And that, for me, is really one of the biggest issues of not just holding politicians accountable, but holding ourselves accountable as citizens.
I think those are excellent, and those are excellent points, you two, and I appreciate them. And I have to keep in mind too that, and it's to your point, Lorena, this is a very cluttered time, isn't it, to try to hear the for voices to assert themselves, but also to hear their voices. And so by that, I simply mean we're in a crisis in this city, as in many cities across the country. We are in a state of emergency. And so certain people their voices will be heard, and others might get diminished, perhaps even drowned out. I wonder if this is the perfect time in this kind of a state of emergency where the traditional voices like men's voices are heard louder than women's. Is that a concern, Marlene?
I would say so. And the reason why, Grant, is that when I am listening to a politician, and I'm listening to a leader who wants me to act in a certain way, take certain actions, and they don't look like me, they aren't really, I have very little in common with them. And you do wonder, back to what I said early on, do they really understand my situation? And so in that case, it would be helpful to have multiple voices that are saying the same thing. Not that people can't have their own opinion, but if there's an agreement on what the action is that needs to be taken, to have multiple voices, to have some of those councillors saying the same things as the mayor. What becomes confusing if there's a lot of different directives being given. But if there's a similar directive, I'd rather hear it. Our basic nature is we'd rather hear it from somebody who's like myself. That makes it easy for me to say, yes, I'll do that.
What will the two of you be looking for in the days and weeks ahead as we remain in this pandemic? Lorena, how about you?
Well, there's what I hope for, and that is a very robust examination of how we got here and what are the critical steps we need to do in rebuilding society that reflects equality, sustainability, and a great respect for the planet, frankly. And I think there's a lot of very serious, rather than just rushing to recover the economy, I think the economy sits in the bigger framework and a bigger paradigm of goals.
And Marlene, how about you? What are you looking at down the road as we stay in this pandemic?
My first concern is that we look after the most vulnerable in our society, and we have our long-term care residents that is very concerning. So really being able to see the physical care and that our numbers don't get totally out of control for our elderly and others who live in long-term care facilities. And I guess the other thing would be for understanding that people will be patient. I'm looking for patience on everybody's part to still continue to work together, to not lose our patience and say, enough already, I've done my bit, but that we continue to stay the course.
Lorena McKennit, Marlene Jansen, I think you're ambassadors, you're community activists for good, the performing arts, scholarship, enterprise, leadership, much else, and not just here, but beyond. I appreciate our time together. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Grant. And thank you, Marlene.
Yes, very nice meeting you, Lorena and Grant. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I forgot my great phrase, take care and take charge. So thanks, Lorena.
Oh, yeah, that was
great. Yeah. The sound bites.